Politicians decide their own story in advance and sell that story through optics, through misinformation, through propaganda, through a willing media eager for heroes and uplifting stories. Throughout his career in politics, Rudy Giuliani cultivated an image for himself: the top cop, the counter-terror expert, the hero, the man who turned New York City around, the man who foresaw 9/11, and the man who saved the city on that tragic day. This image was held together through iconic visuals and a mythology that is more appealing than the truth. Since 2020, that image has changed, owing much to his relationship with Donald Trump, various scandals related to the administration, as well as a series of embarrassing public disasters. The narrative in the media was one of surprise. What happened to America's mayor? The fall from grace is always a fascinating story, and the media appreciates it when a story is written for them. However, the story of Rudy Giuliani is not that of a hero who became a villain. Anyone who followed his tenure as mayor found his top cop image transparent, and his so-called turnaround of New York dubious. Anyone who read the report from the 9/11 Commission or further studies found his Hero of 9/11 act a performance. Giuliani has not fallen from a grace that he never had. He simply lost control of his image, and now that he has, his actions over his career are much clearer, his motivations more obvious, and his misdeeds harder to ignore. Rudy Giuliani grew up in an Italian-American neighborhood in New York City. His father was a low-level mob enforcer, a part of his life that he preferred not to acknowledge in public. It was perhaps this background that made Giuliani desire the opposite image: a tough-on-crime prosecutor. Giuliani worked in the Ronald Reagan administration as Associate Attorney General and eventually in the Southern District of New York, the most sought-after United States Attorney's office. After a failed mayoral campaign in 1989, Giuliani ran again in 1993, focusing his attention on minor nuisances to the lives of New Yorkers. Giuliani did not blame the problems with the city on poverty and the city's unwillingness to combat it. He instead blamed it on the victims of poverty. It's the street tax paid to drunks and panhandlers. It's the squeegee men shaking down the motorist waiting at the light. It's the trash storms, the swirling mass of garbage left by peddlers and panhandlers and open-air drug bazaars on unclean streets. Giuliani inverted the blame. The problem was not poverty, the problem was the poor were just in the way. When Giuliani was elected mayor, he weaponized the NYPD to make life miserable for the poor, to vacate them from public view, to operate under the broken windows style of policing, and to over-police black neighborhoods. Poverty did not go away, it was merely less visible, the goal of conservative politicians and perhaps politicians in general. The NYPD conducted sweeps of parks and other public places to arrest homeless people and move them to shelters. This was not done to help the homeless, but to remove them from sight. Shelters have limitations, and Giuliani himself campaigned on reducing city services for the homeless. From time to time, the NYPD would make headlines for their Gestapo tactics. When 4 police officers murdered African immigrant Amadou Diallo, Giuliani remained cold. According to Andrew Kurtzman, author of Rudy Giuliani, Emperor of the City, minority residents had been harassed and humiliated by police so many times on the streets of their own neighborhoods that the department had come to be viewed as an occupying force, and the shooting of the African street peddler was the last straw. Watching to see how Giuliani would respond to Diallo's death, the public saw a cold man, unsympathetic to the pain of black residents, and so alienated from their leaders that he'd refused to meet with them for years. When black leaders asked to meet with Giuliani, the mayor refused. It was a constant source of frustration for black leaders, consistently being denied an audience with the mayor or to have their concerns heard. Giuliani's tenure as mayor was riddled with bizarre scandals and outrageous public statements, some political and some personal. In a desperate attempt at inciting a culture war, Giuliani somehow came down hard on the world of art, threatening to cut funding if museums displayed paintings that offended his Catholic sensibilities. Giuliani feuded with the Board of Education, supporting the privatization of schools that parents voted against. These public feuds with invented enemies paled in comparison to the intersection between his romantic life and his professional life. According to Michael Wolff, author of The Tragedy of Rudy Giuliani, no successful politician in modern media times had been so open with his disregard of the public protocols of marriage as Giuliani. As mayor, he cheated on his then-wife, his second wife, Donna Hanover, carrying on a long-time affair with a 28-year-old junior staffer, Christine Lategano, who was suddenly promoted to top staffer. In the throes of his next public affair with Judy Nathan, a pharmaceutical sales representative that he met at his favorite cigar bar, he rejected his wife, still technically Hanover, and informed her of the formal end of their marriage in a news conference. Despite all this, some New Yorkers were happy that Giuliani had seemingly brought the crime rate down. However, prior to becoming mayor, the crime rate in New York had already begun dropping, as it had throughout the United States since the 90s. Supporters of Rudy Giuliani ignored this, giving credit to the mayor's increase in police officers and advocacy for more aggressive police tactics. Ever since the crime rate began to drop in the 90s, study after study has concluded that the cause of this drop is more related to economy, criminogenic conditions, social change, and even reproductive rights. There is no one singular cause. In fact, among these reasons, the increase in police power and the crime bill were negligible as factors. Nevertheless, even though it is probably false, it sounds true. More police officers equals less criminals sounds like it makes sense, and people can more readily understand the concept, more readily accept the concept. Giuliani was counting on that. Politicians count on the fact that people will sometimes accept something that appears true without context rather than what is true when context is added. Now, it would be dishonest to claim that there were no victories during Rudy Giuliani's tenure as mayor, but it would also be dishonest to give undue credit and to whitewash his many failings. This false image of crime and this false image of himself provides cover to do as he pleases. Giuliani helped gentrify neighborhoods in New York and made them more expensive. Well, who cares, he says. The economy went up during his tenure. Giuliani helped establish a more aggressive NYPD, the consequences of which are still being felt today. Well, who cares, he says. The crime rate went down during his tenure. Giuliani learned that in politics, perception is reality, and this lesson served him well when he needed to establish himself as a hero to the public on the most significant day of his life. This next section is difficult to talk about, but it is also impossible to ignore. On September 11th, 2001, Rudy Giuliani was made the most popular politician in the United States. This happened for 3 reasons. First, he was recorded walking down the streets of New York following the attack on the World Trade Center. Second, he touted his Office of Emergency Management as the reason that any New Yorkers were saved that day. Third, he was a visible figurehead and a symbol of strength during a day in which the President of the United States, George W. Bush, was comparatively absent. Bush will forever be remembered as the president who continued reading a story to children after being told a plane had struck the World Trade Center, then kept going for another 7 minutes after being told a second plane had struck and that the nation was most definitely under attack. He and his administration were also slow to make remarks on the events of that day, something that might ease the tensions of the nation. Perhaps because they were too busy already plotting an endless series of wars. Who knows? To give the devil his due, Giuliani made a number of speeches both on that day and in the aftermath. He consulted experts on what he should say in order to ease the frayed nerves of the residents of New York City, and indeed the nation. His speeches were well received. It was the least he could do. As for any practical help, that is where giving Giuliani any credit must end. The notions that Giuliani helped spread that day about his fabled Office of Emergency Management and how he foresaw everything were absolutely wrong. And years of studies, investigations, and the 9/11 Commission itself have all proven that, if anything, Giuliani left New York unprepared for a terrorist attack due to a series of dangerous and selfish decisions. Prior to Giuliani's tenure as mayor, the city already had an Office of Emergency Management run by the police department. However, Giuliani wanted the office to be completely under his control. Giuliani established the headquarters of his mayor's Office of Emergency Management at the worst possible location, the World Trade Center. Although terrorists previously targeted this location in 1993, and Giuliani was warned that this was a potentially catastrophic mistake, he refused to take the advice of experts. Giuliani demanded that the Office of Emergency Management be at the World Trade Center for one simple reason. It was within walking distance of the City Hall. Giuliani did not want to have to drive to the Office of Emergency Management headquarters, and in the case of an emergency, he wanted to be present to be seen coordinating instead of leaving it to the professionals. When the World Trade Center was struck, the OEM headquarters at the location had to be evacuated. The OEM was directed by a man named Richie Shearer, who was appointed not because of any experience or talent, but because he was a Giuliani loyalist. Shearer earned the position not because he was the best man for the job, but as an exchange for his endorsement of Giuliani. Shearer was a leader of one of the few unions to endorse Giuliani's 1993 candidacy, the Dispatchers Union. On 9/11, Shearer was completely lost, unprepared for a job that he received entirely because he would follow the mayor's orders. 9/11 Commission member and former Secretary of the Navy, John Lehman, said that Giuliani's OEM was not worthy of the Boy Scouts, let alone this great city. According to Wayne Barrett, author of Grand Illusion, The Untold Story of Rudy Giuliani and 9/11, the myth-making about Rudy Giuliani began on September 11th, and it involved an attempt to extrapolate his dramatic performance on that day into something more important. It seemed unfeeling, almost unpatriotic, to ask whether Giuliani and his underlings had done enough to prepare New York for this terrible, although in some ways predictable, moment. It was much less understandable, as the months wore on, to allow the afterglow of that moment to impose a national amnesia. Another serious blunder, one that undoubtedly cost countless lives, was Giuliani not providing the fire department with modern communications equipment. They desperately needed more than the old 1960s-style handy-talkies, but this was not given priority. A lot of the firefighters died that day because they did not know where to go or when to evacuate. As far as emergency services went, Giuliani was far more concerned with funding the increase in police presence and militarization because these were steps that could be seen by the public, unlike the more invisible emergency upgrades that never came. The visibility of this increased police presence would allow Giuliani's claims of lowering the crime rate to be more believable, whereas modern communications equipment would not serve this image. Anyone can make mistakes during a crisis, but these actions that set the stage for this disaster took place in the years prior to 9/11. Giuliani, calm and collected in the pre-9/11 world, chose himself over the citizens of New York time and time again. Again from Grand Illusion by Wayne Barrett. The facts, depressing but unavoidable, were that Giuliani had allowed the city to meet the disaster of September 11th unprepared in myriad ways. His sine qua non of preparedness for disasters like this one, the Office of Emergency Management, had neither the power nor the capacity to cope with any grave crisis. The command center had been built in the most vulnerable location possible, leaving the city without an operational headquarters when one was most needed. The public authority that owned the World Trade Center was encouraged to evade agreements binding it to comply with the building and fire codes, and the city's most critical agency that morning, the fire department, was allowed to retain ancient customs, faulty communications, and a culture that left it incapable of protecting itself or others in its worst moment of crisis. Based on the 9/11 Commission, further studies, and testimony from police officers and firefighters, the response was hindered by the actions and policies of Rudy Giuliani. More people died due to his negligence and ego, and no amount of optics can change that. Giuliani became the hero of 9/11 because he happened to be mayor when it occurred. He weaponized a mythology about himself, a fabrication about himself, to further his political career. Giuliani helped popularize the idea that questioning his mythology was unpatriotic. In the aftermath of 9/11, something unpatriotic was tantamount to treasonous, and few dared to question his fabricated anti-terror bona fides until years later. About 2 weeks after 9/11, seeing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Rudy Giuliani attempted to cancel the 2001 New York City mayor election. Giuliani was on his way out as 9/11 approached, and following the attack, he tried to remain in office indefinitely. His efforts were immediately thwarted, and though his tyrannical action would have been seen as a massive authoritarian overreach in any other year, in any other city, conducted by any other individual, his unearned but still powerful goodwill allowed for this to be quickly swept under the rug, never damaging his reputation. Few people even remember it to this day. In 2008, Giuliani ran for president of the United States. However, his close association with a corrupt, tax fraud criminal named Bernard Kerik, as well as having no real identity beyond the now fraudulent hero of 9/11 persona, Giuliani faded into the background and eventually left the race. He went back into private practice and largely disappeared from the public eye until... Rudy Giuliani had been out of the spotlight for years. There was speculation in 2010 that he might run for governor of New York, but he quickly squashed it, claiming that he would spend more time on his law firms, Giuliani Partners and Bracewell and Giuliani. He had transformed his name into one of respect, however unearned that respect might have been, and he was cashing in on that image. That all changed in 2015, when Giuliani began to catch the attention of the Republican Party once more, not to mention the media. At a Republican fundraising event in 2015, Giuliani said of then-President Barack Obama, "I do not believe that President Obama loves America. He doesn't love you and he doesn't love me. He wasn't brought up the way you were brought up, and I was brought up through love of his country." When criticized for this comment being a racist dog whistle, Giuliani said that it could not have been racist because Obama has a white mother. Giuliani was not the only Republican testing the waters of thinly veiled nationalism, racism, and xenophobia. In May, Donald Trump announced his candidacy for President of the United States, and in 2016, his inflammatory, media-assisted campaign bought him the Republican nomination. Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani went way back. Mayor Giuliani helped the future president with his real estate and appeared together in a well-known comedy sketch at Giuliani's Inner Circle press roast. In 2016, both saw a new relationship between them as mutually beneficial. For Giuliani, it meant that he was back in the picture as part of the Trump campaign, back in the spotlight after years in the private sector. His image had not yet been eroded, but his memory was fading. Siding with Trump allowed him to steal some of the spotlight for himself, and if elected, Giuliani could take a cabinet position, or so he thought. According to Michael Wolff, author of Fire and Fury, Inside the Trump White House, Giuliani wanted to be the Secretary of State, and Trump had in so many words offered him the job. The resistance to Giuliani from the Trump circle derived from the same reason Trump was inclined to give him the job. Giuliani had Trump's ear, and wouldn't let go. The staff whispered about his health and stability. He was offered Attorney General, Department of Homeland Security, and Director of National Intelligence, but he turned them all down, continuing to hold out for state, or in what staffers took to be the ultimate presumption, or grand triangulation, the Supreme Court. For Trump, the benefits were even more obvious. Giuliani was still seen as a moderate Republican, despite evidence to the contrary. If Giuliani could become his defender, his attack dog against accusations and scandal, Trump's protestations of innocence would appear more legitimate. At the Republican National Convention, America's mayor said that Trump would do for the United States what he did for New York. To the Republicans in attendance, who remembered only the optics of 9/11, this was a remarkable endorsement, but for everyone who knew the truth, this was a threat. Once Trump was elected, Giuliani's gambit did not pay off, as his insistence on Secretary of State and nothing else resulted in him getting the latter. Nothing. Giuliani was instead given the role of advisor, which meant he had no real power. But eventually he got a more personal role as part of Trump's team, his lawyer. Trump had long seen his lawyer as his fixer, someone to disentangle himself from scandal through criminal methods that go beyond the traditional role of lawyer. That was Michael Cohen's position for years. Once Cohen had his public fall, owing in large part to his association with Trump, there was an opening, and Giuliani jumped in to protect Trump against the Mueller investigation. Giuliani's law firm did not want to represent Trump, which forced Giuliani to go it alone. Again, from the tragedy of Rudy Giuliani. Beyond his atrophied legal skills, the 74-year-old, given his weight and his knee injury, could barely rise from a chair or get out of a car. There was the belief among many that, at best, his intellectual prowess had surely dimmed. He was, as he told Bannon and as most believed, too old to go back to practicing law. What's more, not to put a fine point on it, he was often drunk. Almost simultaneously with his new appointment as the president's lawyer, Giuliani's third marriage formally broke up. This was accompanied by a new affair, this time with a hospital administrator, Maria Rosa Ryan, 53. The Department of Justice long ago signaled it would never indict a sitting president, regardless of the crime, which meant Giuliani didn't have to do all that much except protect Trump's public image while he was under fire and delegitimize the investigation to the voters. Eventually, Giuliani was given a different task altogether. With re-election looming, Trump allegedly instructed Giuliani to uncover information on likely Democratic nominee Joe Biden and his son Hunter. From 2014 to 2019, Hunter Biden served on the board of Burisma Holdings, one of the largest natural gas producers in Ukraine. In 2019, Giuliani privately urged Ukrainian President Zelensky to dig up information on Hunter, as this would benefit Trump's re-election in 2020. Giuliani conducted this operation with two Ukrainians named Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. In October 2019, both Parnas and Fruman were arrested for planning to direct funds from a foreign government to United States politicians. Also that year, an investigation into Giuliani's role began. Trump himself was caught pressuring the Ukrainian president to launch an investigation against the Biden family, allegedly threatening to withhold foreign aid if he did not comply. In December, Trump was impeached for this, but partisan politics make conviction in the Senate a near impossibility for any president and for any misdeed. Nevertheless, even with Trump still in office, it became clear to even those who bought into Rudy Giuliani as America's mayor and the hero of 9/11 that he had chosen his associations poorly and that he was on the wrong side of history. For those who had followed his career closely, this was merely confirmation of the rot inside Giuliani that had existed from the beginning. In 2020, following the election victory of Joe Biden, Giuliani became one of the loudest proponents of the election conspiracy theory, and in doing so, permanently aligned himself with Trump. In addition to his false image as a moderate and a man of conviction, his image on a more personal level was tainted through a stream of humiliating public disasters. In 2020, Giuliani was caught, almost literally, with his pants down. In the comedy picture Borat subsequent movie film, Giuliani was introduced to a young woman portraying an even younger woman. Giuliani started touching himself in her presence. After the election, Giuliani held a press conference at Four Seasons Total Landscaping, presumably because someone in Trump's orbit mistakenly thought they had booked the event at a Four Seasons hotel. The details of what exactly went wrong are in dispute, as some have tried desperately to save face. On January 6, 2021, at a rally in Washington, D.C., Giuliani shouted that there must be a trial by combat, and he got exactly that. Much like in the wake of 9/11, Giuliani once again tried his hand at authoritarian election interference. Trump was impeached again for inciting the insurrection, or riot, or whatever euphemism makes people more comfortable about the loss of life that day. Giuliani slunk away after Joe Biden was inaugurated, possibly never to be seen again after a steady stream of public humiliations. And then the other shoe dropped. The Ukraine investigation escalated in April 2021. Giuliani's offices and home were raided by the FBI and officials from the Southern District of New York. 18 electronic devices were confiscated. The investigation surrounds whether or not Giuliani acted as an unregistered foreign agent for then-President Trump, but the extent of the potential charges has not yet been revealed. In addition to these potential charges, Giuliani is now suffering the added public humiliation of being raided by the SDNY, where he himself was once an attorney. Even if Giuliani is never arrested or convicted, this cloud of suspicion hanging over him from the district that previously propelled him into stardom is a final humiliation that will last him the rest of his life. His image has been washed away. His optics have been exposed as transparent propaganda, and all that is left is another disgraced politician, permanently melting down in front of people he tried to fool his entire life.